He thought the hive was dead, until it started humming back at him. At 18, Noah Vance had already learned that silence usually meant abandonment, not peace. So when the letter came with his name printed too neatly across the front, he expected bad news, not a second chance. But inside was something stranger than hope. A legal notice informing him that he had inherited a honey farm from a man he'd never met. A grandfather whose name had never once come up in the years he'd been passed from one foster home to another like a misplaced item nobody wanted to claim. The timing felt almost cruel, arriving the same week he was told to pack up and leave the system for good. Handed a small check and a list of shelters like a polite dismissal from a life that was never really his. With nowhere else to go, Noah took a bus that seemed to travel farther away from everything familiar with every mile, eventually dropping him off along a quiet rural road where the air smelled faintly sweet, like something blooming out of season, and where the property waited behind a rusted gate hanging half open as if it had been expecting him. The farm stretched wider than he imagined, rows of wooden boxes arranged with unnatural precision across the land, each one aligned as though someone had measured every inch. Yet the place felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. Not decayed, not ruined, just paused. The farmhouse stood upright, windows dusty but unbroken, tools stacked neatly on the porch, boots by the door as if their owner had simply stepped away for a moment and forgotten to return. Inside, it was the same story. Everything in place, nothing disturbed, but covered in a thin film of time that suggested years had passed without a single hand touching any of it. Noah dropped his bag on the floor and walked through the room slowly, half expecting someone to appear and demand to know what he was doing there. But the only sound was the creak of old wood under his feet and the faint echo of wind slipping through the cracks. Then he noticed what was missing. No buzzing, no movement, no bees. For a honey farm, the silence was unnatural, almost unsettling, like a heartbeat that had suddenly stopped. He stepped outside again, scanning the rows of hives stretching across the field, each one identical, each one closed, and not a single sign of life around them. It didn't make sense. Even abandoned farms attracted something: wild bees, insects, decay. But here there was nothing, just that same heavy stillness pressing in from all sides. Trying to shake the feeling, Noah went back inside and started searching for anything that might explain what had happened, eventually finding a stack of old journals tucked neatly on a shelf, their pages filled with tight, careful handwriting that belonged to the grandfather he had never known. At first, the entries were exactly what you'd expect. Notes about weather patterns, high productivity, seasonal changes, small observations about bee behavior that seemed harmless enough, even comforting in their routine. But as he flipped further, the tone shifted. The writing became sharper, more hurried. The lines pressed harder into the paper as if written under stress. Short sentences replaced long ones. Observations turned into questions. Questions turned into warnings. They're not leaving the hive. Unusual clustering behavior. Watching me longer than they should. Noah frowned, unsure whether to take it seriously or dismiss it as the ramblings of an old man who had spent too much time alone. But something about the consistency of the entries made it hard to ignore. It wasn't random. It was a progression, and it led somewhere. He closed the journal and stepped back outside, drawn once more to the rows of hives, his eyes scanning them more carefully now, looking for anything that stood out. That's when he saw it. At the far edge of the property, separated from the others by a stretch of empty ground, was a single hive that didn't belong. It was darker, its wood painted, black instead of the faded natural tones of the rest, and it looked newer somehow, or maybe just more intact, as if time had avoided it. A strip of old warning tape hung loosely around it, fluttering slightly in the breeze, though the air everywhere else felt still. Noah hesitated, something instinctive telling him to keep his distance. But curiosity had always been stronger than caution in his life, mostly because he'd never had the luxury of choosing the safe option. As he walked closer, the feeling returned, that strange pressure in the air, like standing too close to something you couldn't see but could somehow feel. The hive was completely sealed, every edge reinforced, every gap closed off as if whatever was inside wasn't meant to get out, or something outside wasn't meant to get in. Then he saw the carving. Rough, uneven letters scratched deep into the wood. Not decorative, not accidental, but deliberate and urgent in a way that made his stomach tighten. "Do not open the last hive." The words looked old, but not faded, as if they had been carved with enough force to outlast everything else on the farm. Noah stared at them longer than he meant to, his reflection faintly visible in the dark surface of the box, distorted just enough to make it feel like he was looking at someone else. He stepped back slowly, glancing around the empty field, half expecting to hear something, anything, but the silence remained, thick and unmoving. It should have been simple. Leave it alone. Take what little value the farm had, sell it, move on. That's what anyone else would do. But Noah had spent his entire life walking away from things he didn't understand, things that didn't make sense, things that felt wrong but were easier to ignore than confront. And standing there, staring at that sealed black hive, he realized this was the first thing that actually belonged to him, even if it came with a warning he couldn't ignore. As he turned to head back toward the house, he told himself he'd forget about it, that he'd focus on fixing the place up, figuring out his next step, surviving like he always had. But as he reached the porch and glanced back one last time, he could have sworn, just for a second, that the air around the hive shimmered slightly, like heat rising off asphalt, and though there was still no sound, no movement, no sign of life at all, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like something was waiting. The moment Noah touched the hive, it felt like something inside it woke up completely. For 2 days, he tried to ignore it, throwing himself into small repairs around the farmhouse, telling himself the carved warning meant nothing, that the journals were just the anxious thoughts of a man who had been alone too long. But the silence of the farm made that harder with every passing hour. There were no insects, no birds, no distant hum of life, just an unnatural stillness that pressed in on him, making even his own breathing sound out of place. On the second night, it started again, that low vibration, deeper this time, not something he heard but something he felt, like the ground itself was humming beneath him. He sat up in bed, heart pounding, already knowing where it was coming from. The black hive. By morning, the sound was gone, but the feeling wasn't. It lingered, pulling at his attention until he found himself walking toward the edge of the property again, slower this time, more cautious. The hive looked the same, sealed, silent, untouched, but standing near it made his chest tighten, like he was being watched from somewhere he couldn't see. Back inside, he flipped through the journals again, this time focusing only on the last entries. The handwriting had grown more urgent, more uneven. They respond to presence. They're not acting like a hive. They don't forget. And finally, if you open it, they will know you. Noah stared at that line longer than he should have. It should have scared him enough to leave. Instead, it did the opposite. Because for once in his life, something wasn't ignoring him. That thought stuck with him, growing stronger until curiosity outweighed caution. By evening, he had already decided. He found an old beekeeper suit, pulled it on despite the stiff, worn fabric, grabbed a crowbar, and walked back out as the sky dimmed. Each step toward the hive felt heavier, like crossing a line he couldn't uncross, but he kept going. When he reached it, the silence felt absolute, like the entire world had paused. He hesitated only for a second before forcing the crowbar under the lid and pushing down. The seal cracked sharply, and instantly, the vibration stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The sudden silence rang in his ears as he slowly lifted the lid, expecting a swarm, chaos, something, but what he saw froze him in place. Inside were thousands of bees, completely still, packed together in perfect formation. Not one moved. Not one wing flickered. It looked less like a living hive and more like something preserved. Then he noticed the detail that made his stomach drop. Every single bee was facing upward, facing him. His breath caught as he leaned in slightly, tried to make sense of it. And then one bee moved. Just one. A small, deliberate shift. Then another. And another. A ripple passed through the hive, controlled, coordinated, nothing like natural movement. Noah stumbled back, heart racing, but his eyes locked onto something at the bottom of the hive, a small metallic object partially buried in dark wax. Without thinking, driven by a mix of fear and something deeper, he reached in and pulled it out. And the moment his fingers closed around it, every single bee inside the hive moved at once. The bees didn't chase him, but they didn't ignore him either. Noah barely made it back to the farmhouse, slamming the door behind him. his breath shaking as he waited for the sound of a swarm that never came. Minutes passed. Then silence again. Not empty this time, but watchful. Slowly, he looked down at what he had taken from the hive. A small metal container, cold and sealed tight, like it had been hidden there on purpose. His hands hesitated for only a moment before opening it. Inside was a flash drive, a folded note, and a small vial filled with a thick, almost black honey that seemed too dark to be natural. The note was short, written in the same urgent handwriting from the journals. Asterisk, if you're reading this, they chose you too. Asterisk, a chill ran through him, but he pushed forward, plugging the flash drive into an old laptop he had managed to get working earlier. The screen flickered before a video appeared. His grandfather, older, thinner, eyes tired but sharp. He spoke quickly, like time had already run out. Years ago, he explained, a nearby agricultural company had been experimenting with genetically modified bees, designed to improve pollination, increase production, control ecosystems. But something went wrong. The bees didn't just adapt. They changed. They began acting with coordination beyond instinct, storing things that weren't nectar, reacting to human presence in ways that couldn't be explained. And eventually, they started doing something impossible. They began encoding information inside the honey itself. Not just data, memories, experiences, fragments of awareness. The black honey in the vial, he said, was proof. Everything he had learned, everything he had seen, it was all inside it. His voice grew quieter near the end, more uncertain. Asterisk, they're not broken, they're evolving. And I think they're choosing who understands them. Asterisk, the video cut out abruptly. Noah sat there in silence, the weight of it pressing in as his eyes slowly shifted to the vial in his hand. Outside, the farm was still. The hive was silent, waiting. He had a choice now: walk away, destroy it, or expose something the world wasn't ready to understand. But as he stared into the dark honey, the surface seemed to ripple slightly, like it was reacting to him. And for a brief second, he saw something inside it. Not a reflection, not light, but something deeper. A memory that wasn't his. His grip tightened slightly. Then, without fully realizing why, Noah twisted the cap open.